talking about the Ramban, his approach to Chanuka. And so we're looking at the Ramban's commentary on the Torah, right? So if I was to ask you, where in the Torah is the source for Chanuka? You'd probably be a little baffled by that question. Why?
It's not in the Torah.
Not in the Torah. Why not?
Well, it didn't occur at the time of the Torah.
Historically, it happened much later,
yeah.
right? So we don't think we'd find anything here, and it'd be a little bit anachronistic to assume that we would find something. Yeah.
Is this an allusion when Aaron gets...
Yeah, don't ruin the shear.
What's that?
Don't ruin the shear.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, that is an important element.
All right, okay.
But right, certainly explicitly in the Torah, we're not going to find anything.
No, okay.
We're not going to find anything on Chanuka because it's a historical event that happened much later. But we're going to find in the Ramban, and keep in mind the message that we've been mentioning very often in our going through the Parshios, that this idea of Maisa Avos Siman Labanim. That the events that happened to our forefathers, they portend, they're a remez to the events that are going to happen to future generations. So there's room within that system that the Ramban likes to develop that he might have something to go with in his commentary in the Chumash that he talks about Hanukkah. We mentioned before the class, first of all, we're not on next week, we're going to have a week off, but then the week after Parshas Vayechi, we'll be back on, and there's another Ramban that deals with an issue in Hanukkah that we'll cover that week. It's going to be 2 weeks past Chanuka at that point. It's interesting. I chose not to pick it because it's a little bit of a downer on Chanuka. Ramban has something that's a little sharp to say about the implications and about what happened in Chanuka, so we'll stick with the positive on Chanuka tonight. But when we get to Parshas Vayechi, we'll probably go over that Ramban. But anyways, so I wanted to give over this, this famous idea that the Ramban has, that you've heard of, that, but it's important to realize, I think, when people give over this Ramban, they don't give it the appropriate background. They don't go through other pieces of the Ramban that I think paints a much deeper picture. It makes it much more profound. So before we start with the more well-known Ramban in Bahaloscha, we're going to talk about the Ramban, what he says at the end of Parshas Naso. Parshas Naso is the parsha right before. What's going on at that point in general in the Torah? It's in Sefer Bamidbar. It's when Klal Yisrael is finishing up with the Mishkan. And at the end of Shemos is where all the steps in its construction are taking place. But in Bamidbar, they talk about the whole inauguration process of the Mishkan. And you have this is taking place historically in the second year of the Jewish people being in the Midbar. It's on the 1st of Nisan that we start doing the inauguration. Aharon does various karbanos to inaugurate things. The Nesiim, the heads of all the tribes, the Shvatim, they're doing their karbanos, and that's actually what's going to be in the Kriyas Torah for Shacharis for the next 8 days. For Shabbos also, I think in Maftir, we're going to be discussing the karbanos of the Nesiim, of the leaders of all the tribes. It's pretty boring actually, but if you ever remember hearing this and leaning over and over, karbana, everybody knows it by heart because it's just said over and over again, because you go through all 12 Nesiim, and each one brings the exact same things as their gift. And the Torah, for some reason, sees the need to still give the specifics and go over each one and not just say, and the second guy, and the third guy, and the fourth guy, they all give the same as the first. They don't do that. And that's something else to discuss perhaps later. I think the Ramban does address that when we get to Parshas Naso. But what is important that we're going to focus on tonight is that what was happening at that time, that was on the 1st of Nisan, the inauguration of the Mishkan, when the Nesiim brought their karbanos. But the Midrash tells us that actually, and this is probably the reason why we say it in Shacharis and Kriyas Torah for the next 8 days, is that it was really meant to take place on the 25th of Kislev, on Chanuka. That the reason why it didn't, that's when the Mishkan was formally completed, but the reason why we didn't actually inaugurate it, we didn't actually start using the Mishkan until the 1st of Nisan, was because Nisan was a very special month for the Jewish people. God, he wanted it to be saved until that point. And the Midrash says that, Kislev feels bad. It lost out on this, tremendous chus of having the Mishkan inaugurated during its month. So Hashem said, don't worry, I'm going to, make it up for you. I'm going to make the holiday of Hanukkah on that month instead. Right? So that's certainly one connection. It's a very nice connection. But we're going to elaborate on that. But there's more to it than that. The karbanos of the Nesiim, so what's going on here? So the Ramban, he notes a unique part of the nature of these karbanos. So that's in the first source. This is the Ramban at the end of Parshas Naso, where he discusses the unique elements. Not like we mentioned, each nasi had his own korban, but it was everybody brought the exact same thing. But as a whole, the things that they brought were unique and they were special amongst other karbanos and other types of system. Let's say when a person has taras and he brings a whole set of karbanos, or other people in other situations they bring a whole set. This is very unique, and the Ramban's going to explain why. So the Ramban says Solis Belula Bashem Lamincha. So this is Ramban to Perek Zayin Pasuk Yud Gimel and Bamidbar. So he's the Dibur HaMaskil, the first open quote that he uses is not really relevant to what he's talking about. Now he's talking in a very general sense about the karbanos that the Nesiim brought. He says Chanukah Nesiim es HaMizbeach v'chol aminin hakrevim elav. The Nesiim, and you'll probably notice a word that's going to keep popping up in this Ramban, and that's certainly a connection that we're going to develop. But Chancho, right, that they were inaugurating the Nesiim, the Mizbeach, the altar in the Mishkan, with every type of karban possible to bring. Right, they gave every single kind. Al kol haviu mincha uktoros va'ola v'chatas u'shlamim. They brought all the basic types of karbanos that you have. I'm not going to get into the halachic details, but you had everything. The mincha, the ketores, the ola, the chatas, shlamim, and all the things that you read in Kakeli when we, before Musaf on the holidays. All of these different types of karbanos, they were all brought by the Nesiim. V'ketores v'achatas hara asha. Ramban says, and particularly striking is the fact that they were doing all this because certain parts of these karbanos were not things that you regularly brought halachically on the mizbeach, on the altar that was outside. For example, the ketores. The ketores was something that was brought in the inner chamber, already in the mikdash proper itself, not outside, right? And you have a chatas. Chatas is also not something that a person brings voluntarily, right? What is a chatas for? Chatas is a sin offering. It's a carbon that a person brings when they do an avera, right? So it's not the kind of thing that you can typically give on a voluntary basis. So the Ramban points that out. These are not things you could give voluntarily. But to complete the rainbow of karbanos that we had in the inauguration of the Mishkan, God allowed it here. It was a hora asha. It was a particular exceptional case. Because they didn't bring these. You typically don't have these karbanos brought by other people. Right, and the other, you might ask on the Ramban's understanding of this, there are certain karbanos that were not brought, like an asham, for example. That's not on the list of things that were brought. He says that's all the same as katas. These are all halakhic details that we don't need to get into, but he mentions that just to defend his shita, that this is a rainbow of karbanos here. So now here's the big idea that he says. God agreed with what the Nesiim actually did when they chose to do this, when they voluntarily chose to bring all these karbanos. And he said in the pasuk itself that each nasi should bring his karban on his given day. Each one did it on a different day. They didn't do it all on the same day. And the Midrash actually tells us, Rashi quotes this, I think Moshe Rabbeinu was very uncomfortable at this point when they were inaugurating the Mishkan, that people were voluntarily bringing things without any kind of, the Mishkan and the karbanos that are brought very, very often always have a very set and strict set of rules that have to be followed. The Nadav and Avihu, they passed away because they were a little overzealous in taking liberties in their bringing of the karbanos, in bringing ketores. So Moshe was very worried here also. He was worried that this is maybe overstepping our bounds, and God said, that's why the language of the pasuk, and the Ramban quotes it, is that God actually had to give explicit permission to Moshe to tell him this is okay, this is fine. So that was what was happening here. God gave this permission. It could be, the Ramban says, that this is in fact a mitzvah for all generations. That in general a person has to inaugurate with a lot of karbanos and the like when you start up a mikdash and a mizbeach. You have this also. The Ramban says, I have other examples in history where we had a mizbeach, we had a new mikdash, and we seem to have followed that pattern. It could be because it was actually a requirement by law. You have Shlomo with regards to the first base of mikdash. Techsiv says in Divrei Hayamim, v'yachnuku es beis ha'elokim ha'melech v'chol ha'am, right? That they dedicated the house of God and him and Shlomo and the entire nation. Right? Actually, if you look at the actual story in the Divrei Hayamim, it's they took what the Nesiim did to a much greater extent. There's actually, I think that Zichron mentions hundreds and thousands of animals being shechted. So it's like blows the mind how many, they brought, and what happened there. V'chein Anshe Knesset Hagadola asu chanukah. Again, that word's coming up. The Anshe Knesset Hagadola, they also had this dedication process with regards to the second Beis HaMikdash. The Chsiv, it says in Sefer Ezra, "V'avdu b'nei Yisrael kahanya v'liva v'shar b'nei galusa chanukas beis halacha." That all the members of the Jewish people, the Kohanim, Levim, Yisraelim, everybody that came from Galutz, from Bavel, they all did a tremendous celebration. Also, I think it was very, when you look at the Psukim, it describes what happened. It was very over the top, so to speak. And that's what's going to be when Mashiach comes, when we have the third Beis HaMikdash. Shneimar v'Yechezkel, Yechezkel HaNavi, he says, he's describing the third Beis HaMikdash. He says, Shivas Yamim Yachru Es HaMizbeach, so there's going to be the first 7 days that the Beis HaMikdash is standing. It's going to be inaugurated. It's going to be purified. Malu Yadav, and the Kohanim are going to be invested with the job of being Kohanim. V'yachlu Es HaYamim, and those days will finish. V'haya Yom Hashmini V'hala, from the 8th day and on, Yasu HaKohanim HaMizbeach Es Eloseim Es Shlamechem. And that's when the Kohanim are going to, after it's been dedicated, use it in a regular way. V'hi chanukah l'mizbeach b'meiluin. It will be a dedication of the mizbeach. Chanukah, it's important to realize, means dedication, right? That's what's taking place in the third Beis HaMikdash also. V'netiya inyan zeh ha-mitzvah. And the Ramban says this is what this seems to be, that this mitzvah here, the Ramban thinks that this is a mitzvah l'doros, for all generations to dedicate with many karbanos and celebration, the building of a mikdash and the mizbeach. Inyan parshas Tameim b'Pesach. This is similar to the idea of the parsha in the Torah that deals with the people that were tummy, that were impure, with regards to the Karban Pesach, right? It's what we call Pesach Sheni, right? When the whole story, how did that develop? You had people that came to Moshe and said, it's not fair, we have an obligation to bring the Karban Pesach, but at the same time, we're being held back because, for whatever good reason, I'm sure, they were tummy. They had to, let's say, tend to a burial, or the like. So what were they going to do? Right, so Moshe Rabbeinu said, let me go ask God what he thinks, we'll see what happens, and God almost has a reaction to this. Says, new mitzvah, Pesach Sheni. There is a makeup for Karban Pesach, and that whole event, that whole mitzvah, that developed as a result of people asking a Shaila and Moshe and saying, what do we do? Right? It came from their voluntary, asking of the question and desire to do this mitzvah. Parshas Bnei Yosef, also the parsha with regards to the children of Yosef. When you have Shevet Yosef, they come. This is after the episode of Benos Slavchad, right? That it was determined through the question of Benos Slavchad, they were self-determined, and they asked the question of what's going to be with our inheritance, right? Because we have no brothers, and our father, he has no sons. It seems to be at this point they think that boys and only boys are going to get inheritance. So Moshe says, good question. He asks God, and then God tells him, when there's no male siblings in the family, so everything goes to the girls. They split it, right? So that was also a mitzvah that was initiated, that whole process, by the fact that people asked the question. You happen to have after that the heads of the Shvatim, of Shevet Yosef specifically, where the Benos Slavchad came from. They said, what are we going to do if these girls, they get all this land and then they marry out, they intermarry, so to speak, they marry out of the tribe, so then that all that land is going to belong to other Shvatim. That won't be very fair. So Moshe said, at least according to the Pasha Pshat in the Psukim, it seems like Moshe was saying at that point, okay, Benos Slavchad have to make sure that they marry within their tribe. And they all did, and it was very nice, everybody was happy, no crisis involved in that at all. And that was only for that generation, not afterwards. We're allowed to marry into other Shvatim if we want, if we could have any idea which Shvatim we're in. It wouldn't be an issue, right? But anyways, the whole parsha of Benos Slavchad coming to Moshe and saying, what do we do? And that was the initiation of a whole new mitzvah, or a whole new, at least particular about the mitzvah, that women can in fact inherit if they have no brothers. Right? So that was all things that were initiated by people because they had a certain passion towards the mitzvah. So the Ramban says, you could say the same thing here. This Chanuka HaMizbeach, the inauguration of the Mishkan that the Nesiim did, that was something that they did with, voluntarily, and it was something that they did with a tremendous amount of love. And God, so to speak, because of their initiative, He created a mitzvah at this point. That when you have a new structure built, a Beis HaMikdash, or a Mizbeach, whatever it is, so there has to be a lot of karbanos brought, an inauguration of it, and a celebration. That's what's going on here. The general theme of all these is where God, so to speak, agrees with the initiative of these people, and then a mitzvah was founded for generations and generations. Right? So this idea, first of all, what word keeps popping up in this Ramban? Hanukkah. Right? So we mentioned earlier, Hanukkah is a word that means dedication. Right? So that's That's almost enough, you would think, right? If you were to ask why do we lean Parshas Nasa, this story about all the Nesiim bringing karbanos in this week's over the days of Hanukkah, so that would almost be enough. We're talking about the dedication, Chanuka, where the day is shared with the word, But is that really enough? There's that Midrash that talks about how the Mishkan should have been built, or should have been used already on the 25th of Kislev, but still there's not really, where's the dedication that's actually taking place in the Hanukkah story? In a technical sense, we would think not really anything, right? Because the Beis Mikdash was there the whole time. The Beis Mikdash wasn't destroyed in the Hanukkah story. It was there. The Yavanim didn't allow us to use it. And eventually we got back in, we purified everything, we used, we managed to find the Pak Shem and the whole story, but there was no dedication. That's what we would think, right? So what's the connection really? So we'll go into that in the next source. But I just one more thing I wanted to point out that I forgot. This Ramban, when he talks about that there's a mitzvah for generations and generations, this gets a little halakhic, but he talks about that there's actually a codified mitzvah that when you have a new Beit HaMikdash or whatever it is, you have to celebrate, you have to dedicate it and inaugurate it in some way. So that actually answers a lot of questions. First of all, the Ramban, he in his Sefer HaMitzvos, his book of his count of the 613. Everybody had a lot of the rabbis in that time. They developed their own count, right? The Rambam not only made a set of mitzvos, but he also made a set of rules that he said, well, what are the qualifications? What counts as a mitzvah? What doesn't? Right? So one of the things he mentions is that I'm not calling anything a mitzvah if it's not for generations and generations. If it's just a one-time command, let's say in the time that the Jews were in the Midbar, I'm not putting that in. And he says specifically that's why he's not bringing in any kind of mitzvah to inaugurate the temple in any way. Right? So he doesn't think that it went for generations to generations. And he's taking issue with the statement of the Bahag. The Bahag was another Rishon at the time that had his own count of mitzvahs, and he made it into a mitzvah that was codified in the count of 613. So the Ramban, same Ramban talking here, in his he has a whole section where he argues on various points of the Rambam in his Sefer HaMitzvos. He takes issue with this, and he defends the Bahag by saying basically what he says in his commentary to the Torah here. This was a mitzvah for generations and generations. And that's what Shlomo HaMelech did in the first Beit HaMikdash. That's what Ezra did in the second Beit HaMikdash, and that's what we're going to do in the third, right? And it answers a lot of questions. There's a Gemara in Moed Katan that talks about Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech had a whole party, a whole celebration for the Beit HaMikdash, like we mentioned. It was for 7 days before the holiday of Sukkot. Right? It was a day of celebration, of feasts, and general joy. Why? What's problematic about that? 7 days before Sukkot, days of feasting and joy.
Yom Kippur.
There's Yom Kippur there, right? So you can't have days of feasting and joy there. And the Gemara Moed Katan asks, how'd they do that? They did. They actually ate and drank on Yom Kippur, and they had a great time. The Gemara asks, first of all, the Gemara the Gemara points out that Klal Yisrael at that time, they were very nervous after they had this celebration. They were like, we just ate on Yom Kippur. What are we going to do? And God actually, he gives them a message. He, like a basketball, comes out and says, "You got it fine, don't worry," and everything was okay. But the Gemara asks, okay, that explains, how they could be put at ease after the fact. But what gave them the right to make that decision beforehand, to choose and say, no Yom Kippur this year? So if you go to the Gemara answers that they made a kal v'chomer. The kal v'chomer argument is it's like all the more so. If I could lift 50 pounds, so kal v'chomer, all the more so I can lift 25, right? So their kal v'chomer argument was that if you have the Nesiim in the Torah that were bringing their voluntary karbanos, right? They were bringing these karbanos in the inauguration of the Mishkan on Shabbos, right? Because it went for 12 straight days. The Gemara explains how they know that it was 12 straight, that they didn't skip Shabbos, but it's assumed that they went 12 straight days, and some of the karbanos they brought were brought on Shabbos. Whoever the Nasi was on the day that turned out to be Shabbos was, apparently doing something that was aser. Right? We have in general the karbanos for Shabbos itself. Those are exceptional. Those are allowed to be brought because the Torah itself tells you to do so. So obviously, when the Torah says bring a karban on Shabbos, it says don't worry about the Isser Malacha. Don't worry about violating anything for Shabbos. But we don't extend it further. We usually assume anything besides that, no other karbanos, no voluntary karbanos can be brought on Shabbos. So the people in Shlomo's time, they saw the Nesiim, they brought it for the inauguration of their Mishkan. That was apparently an occasion that warranted pushing off Shabbos, right? So Kal v'chomer, when we have the Beis HaMikdash, a permanent structure, so we should also be able to do so. And it's Yom Kippur, it's not even Shabbos. Yom Kippur is, at least we view Yom Kippur as a very serious holy day, obviously, but with regards to the severity of, let's say, doing malacha, or there are other aspects of the day also. It has less aliyos than on Shabbos. We're conveying the idea that as holy as Yom Kippur is, Shabbos is still holier, which we usually don't think that way because Yom Kippur only comes along once a year and Shabbos is every week of the year. But nevertheless, with regards to sanctity, Shabbos is of a higher level. So the people in the times of Shlomo, they said, listen, if people back in the times in the Midbar, they were doing malachos and things for the inauguration of the Mishkan on Shabbos, so certainly we can do it for a greater structure on a lesser important holiday, right, like Yom Kippur. So that was their Kal v'chomer. But in general, the whole idea of this is, you have a question on it. Why did the MiTzion in the times of the Midbar, why did they violate Shabbos? Right? Where were they coming from? Right? So according to the Ramban, according to Nachmanides' approach here, that there's an actual mitzvah, right? Because of their initiative, God says, okay, you guys can do it, and not only can you do this mitzvah, I'm going to make it a mitzvah l'doros, a mitzvah for generations. It's codified, right? It's on the books. So then it works just like the karbanos that God tells you to bring on Shabbos. Right, that if you have a situation where the Torah calls for it and demands that you bring karbanos to inaugurate and dedicate the Mishkan or the Mikdash, so then it pushes off Shabbos, it pushes off Yom Kippur. You feast up, you enjoy a good meal on Yom Kippur. When the third Beit HaMikdash comes, hopefully it'll be arranged around Yom Kippur, a nice time that we can celebrate and eat. But anyway, so back to our question that I just wanted to mention that before we skip forward. So the Chanukah, we have that word connection, right? But where exactly is this new inauguration in the holiday of Chanukah itself? That we have the laning, the Torah reading that we have on these days. We talk about these karbonos of the MiTzion, this dedication. So if you look in the next source, it's a Mishnah in Midrash, actually shows us that there was in some ways a rededication and a reason for a rededication. That the Beit HaMikdash was in some ways destroyed during the time of Chanukah. If you look in the Mishnah, it's talking in a general sense about the structure of the Beit HaMikdash, and it says you had 4 side chambers to the fire room. They're talking about the whole architecture of the entire structure of the Beit HaMikdash. And they opened into little alcoves into a hallway, and they're describing all the different parts. I skipped the middle; it's not really so relevant to us. But they mentioned that there's one room, Mizrachis Psavonis, the northeast section. That's where the Chashmonon, the Maccabees, they buried the stones of the Mizbeach, of the altar. Right? Why did they? Because the kings of Greece, they defiled them during the time of Chanukah. So this Mishnah serves as a source to teach us actually that there was in some ways a destruction of the Beit HaMikdash at this time. Not really a destruction of the structure itself, but the Mizbeach at least. They defiled it in some way. They probably made it, I think if the Gemara discusses it in Avodah Zarah, I think they made it into something that has the status of Avodah Zarah, at least to the extent that it couldn't be used in the worship of God in the Beit HaMikdash, which has like a higher standard. Right? Those things typically become forbidden for benefit and for use in serving God. So they had a problem. They didn't know what to do with this Mizbeach, so they buried it. But anyways, this shows the idea that there was a destruction, and they must have built a new Mizbeach at the time of Chanukah, right? If you look, I didn't bring it in as a source, but if you have the apocryphal books, right, the book of Maccabees is a book in between the New and Old Testament, but it's not something that we typically use as it's not part of the canon of Tanakh, and we don't even have the original Hebrew version of it anymore. So there's a lot that could be lost in translation, and we're not really sure about the authenticity of the source. But there is. It's a good resource if you do want to do a little bit of reading about Hanukkah. And in that book, it does mention similarly that this idea that the Assyrian Greeks, they ruined the Mizbeach, they ruined the altar. So with that in mind, I think this idea develops a lot better. If you look in the Maharsha, in the next source, he explains the root of the name of the holiday Hanukkah. So this is the Maharsha. He's a commentary to the Gemara. So he says the well-known approach to why it's called Chanukah first. So my Chanukah, this is the Gemara that talks about what's the reason for Chanukah. It talks about the miracle of the oil, etc. So the Maharsha says, Uferish Aran, the Ran explains, Kolomar Chanu b'chatei. What does Chanukah mean? That they rested on the 25th. That's the idea. And then, the idea that there was a whole war, they fought the Assyrian Greeks, and then on that day they rested. Ayin Sham, see there. Uktzas kasha, but a little bit difficult here, is Mai Chanias Shaykh Hacha. Well, why is rest relevant here? Given the Hutar Behed Malacha. This is a day that everybody else, that, we're allowed to do malacha, we're allowed to do work. I drove here tonight, V'lo nasnu liyom tov elo halu l'hodos. This isn't a day of rest. This is a day of, giving halal and thanks to God. So he doesn't like this explanation. He says instead, V'nir lefarish denikra chanukah al shem chanukah samizbeach. Now, why is it called Chanukah? Because it was a rededication. There was an inauguration of the Mizbeach. There was a new Mizbeach built at this time. That's the name of a chapter in the Gemara. The Beis Chashmonai Gonzu Avnei Mizbeach Sheshaksu Anshe Avodas Gilulim Avodas Zara. Right, the Chashmonaim, the Maccabees, they had to hide away a Mizbeach that was ruined by the idolatrous practices of the Greeks. They had to build a new Mizbeach because of this. That's why we call the holiday Chanukah, inauguration. When the Gemara asks what is Chanukah, they're not talking about why is it called, the name of the holiday, and because of resting, like the Ran says. They're asking what's the reason for why we light candles. And then he mentioned this idea that we talked about earlier. There's a Midrash that talks about the idea that the Mishkan was finished and ready to go on the 25th of Kislev, but it wasn't actually started to be. It didn't actually be inaugurated. It wasn't used until the 1st of Nisan. Because that was the month in which all the avos were born. Nisan's a very special month, not just because of the geula of leaving Mitzrayim, but also all of our forefathers were born then also. And God, he sort of repaid back Kislev during the days of Matisyahu, that there was a new holiday in Kislev instead. These are talking about the holiday is meant to convey an idea of reinaugurating the Mizbeach that was destroyed during the time of Chanukah, and that we had to make a new one, and that's the idea of Chanukah, of dedication, of an inauguration. The reason why it's called that is because of the new Mizbeach that was built at this time. It's actually an interesting idea. Just a little short break, a short vort that Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he says, he gives it a whole divine Torah as to why we eat sufganiyot on Chanukah. And so we typically think it's just because they're oily. You got latkes for that. What do you need sufganiyot for? So he says the reason why is specifically so that when you eat it, you can make an ala mechya at the end. Why is that so important? First of all, apparently it doesn't accomplish anything if you eat a sufganiyot in the middle of a bread meal, according to Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. But why is it such a big deal to make an ala mechya? So he points out, even though ala mechya is actually an abridged form of Birkas Hamazon, there are certain parts of that bracha that are unique to Al HaMichya that don't occur in benching at all. One of them is saying Al Mizbechecha. We ask God for Rachmanas, for mercy on the Mizbeach, right? So Shlomo Zalman says, based on this idea that we've just developed, that because this is a time of a new Mizbeach, and we're asking for Rachmanas in the text of Al HaMichya, we're asking for mercy, that we should have a new Mizbeach. So it's very appropriate to get to say that bracha on Chanukah itself. So eat jelly donuts. You can eat noodles too. Apparently, it'll fulfill the same requirement. You get that bracha and everything's great. Okay, but that's all. That's a Ramban that very much relates to Chanukah. He never spells it out explicitly, but that idea very much translates to what we're doing here. Now I want to get into the more well-known Ramban. So. Parshas Bahaloska is the parsha right after Parshas Nasa, right after this parsha that we just studied with the Nesiim bringing their karbanos. So we have the parsha that begins with talking about Aaron and his mitzvah, or all the Kohanim, not just Aaron, to light the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, or in the Mishkan, which eventually gets translated over to the Beis HaMikdash. So both Rashi and the Ramban, they both explore the connection between these topics. It's a general theme that we have as we get towards Parshios, that we're going to get to the more legalistic things, or also narratives as well in the Torah. So there's going to be always somebody that's going to want to wonder what do these things have to do with each other, that they're next to each other. We typically assume that a smichus haparshios, that there's a proximity between two different ideas, that they're related in some way, that there's something to be connected between the two. So you have Ramban in the next source. He first quotes Rashi, quotes what Rashi says, and he disagrees with it. So Baha'alosacha, when you light the lamps. This is a quote of Rashi. Parshas Menorah Chanukas Hanasim. What's the connection between the karbanos that the Nesiim brought and the lighting of the menorah? When Aaron saw the inauguration that was done by the Nesiim voluntarily, like we mentioned, that was a whole big deal. It turned into a mitzvah for all generations. Chol shadaito, his mind was weakened. He was disheartened because of this. Right? He didn't get to bring a carbon. It was only the 12 tribes, excluding the tribe of Levi, which Aaron was a member of. He wasn't a part of this whole process, neither him or his tribe. God says, by your life, don't worry about this, Aaron. You're zechus, right? Your history about what's going to happen with you. It's going to be greater than what's going to happen to them. Because you're going to be lighting the candles morning and night. Lashon Rashi, that's what Rashi says. Midrash Agada from the Midrash, from Midrash Tanchuma. Actually, if you look in the original Rashi, the words Boker va'erev don't appear. That might be a little significant. We don't have to get into that. But anyways, that's the Ramban's quote of Rashi. And that's what he thinks. So there's this Midrash apparently that says Aaron was so disheartened by the Nesiim, they had a zechus to do a very special mitzvah. And the Ramban said, Rashi says, quoting the Midrash, that Aaron was very disheartened. God said, don't worry, you've got the menorah. Right? So, Ramban doesn't like this. We continue. I don't understand. Why is this providing nachama? Why is this comfort Aaron? You could have consoled him with a ton of things. You could have consoled him with, say, Aaron, don't worry, you get to bring the incense in the morning and the night. Right? That was something that Aaron gets praised for. That he has the ability to go bring the Ketores in front of God. You could say, Aaron, you're the one that gets to bring karbanos, right? All the karbanos of the public. The loaves, also another thing that comes up in karbanos, something specific to the Kohanim, or maybe the Kohen Gadol even. Serving on Yom Kippur, that's something that the Kohen Gadol, Aaron alone, can do. It can only be done by him. It's a very privileged mitzvah. He gets to go to the innermost chamber, the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Kadosh Hashem, he's the Holy One, anointed by God. Omid behichalo, the Sharso levarek b'shmo. He also gets to stand in the Mikdash. He gets to bless the people. He gets to do birkas kohanim. V'shivtu kulo misharsei Elokeinu. And all of his entire tribe, not the tribe, but the entire tribe, in some form or another, they're all serving in the Beis HaMikdash. It's a very big zechus. These guys have a one-time shot, and that's it, right? What's the purpose of Aaron being disheartened by all this? Even if you want to tell me from a karbanos perspective, Aaron also got to bring his own inauguration karbanos. It wasn't the same thing as everybody else is bringing, but he didn't have the karas kesef mishkala, he didn't have that, but he had his own. He got to bring so many karbanos. Maybe you want to tell me, this is different. Aaron, he was obligated to bring these, so he was disheartened that he had to bring something on, through obligation. They got to do something voluntarily. Maybe he was disheartened that he couldn't bring things voluntarily like the Nesiim did. You can't say that, because the mitzvah that was told over him that apparently did comfort him, the menorah, that was also something that was obligatory in nature. Right, so that doesn't solve your problem. So what's so special about the menorah? He doesn't like Rashi's approach for that reason. So he continues. He says, "Aval inyan ha'agada hazu l'drosh remez min aparsha al chanukah shel neiros shahaisa b'bayit sheni alidei Aaron uvanav." Rather, what I think is going on in this Midrash, the Ramban says, that this is alluding to the idea of Chanuka, and here's where the word comes up in the way that you and I know it, right? Chanuka, the holiday of Chanuka, that we light the Chanuka candles, and that happened during the Second Temple period, from Aaron and his sons, so to speak, the Chashmonan, the descendants of Aaron. Ritzoni Lomar, then what I mean to say is Chashmonai, Kohen Gadol Levana, right? The Maccabees, and Kohen Gadol, and Matisyahu and his children. I also found that my idea here is corroborated by another source. There's a Midrash. Shehizkir ha'agada hazu. It mentions this, and it elaborates. Right? Aaron saw that the 12 tribes were, they got to bring their karbanos, he was disheartened, etc. God said to Moshe, Taber al Aaron v'amarte elav, go to Aaron and speak to him. Yish chanukah acheres, sheish ba hadlakas haniros. There's another chanukah that's going to be out there. Not the chanukah, the inauguration of the Mishkan, but another chanukah down the road, where there'll be an involvement of lighting candles. I'm going to cause great miracles that are going to come from you and your sons, and there's going to be a great salvation. It's all going to be because of you and your children. Chanuka b'nei kashmonai. That's going to be the Chanukah that comes from the Maccabees. And that's the connection between these two. So the Ramban finds a Midrash that explicitly says the idea that he wants to advance, that the nechama, the comfort that Aaron has, is that he's going to be, his family is going to take part in a much greater miracle story that's going to unfold much later in history, right? Just to finish the source, we'll discuss this after. For isi od bi'alamdenu, I also saw in Yalamdenu, that's another term he has for Midrash Tanchuma. V'chein b'Midrash Rabba, also in Midrash Rabba, the same idea. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu LaMoshe, God said to Moshe, Leich Amar LaAaron al tisyare. Go say to Aaron not to be afraid, don't be worried. L'gedola mizos ata muchan. For something that's even greater than this, you're being prepared for. HaKarbanos kol zman shebeis hamikdash kayim hi nohagim. The karbanos, those take effect. Those are things that are done throughout the time of the Beis Hamikdash. But the neiros of the menorah, those go forever. The blessings that I'm giving to your children also, those are ones that are not going, with regards to Birkas Kohanim, being able to bless the children of Klal Yisrael, that's also never going to go away. That's something you'll always have the right to do. This is that's the end quote of the Midrash. Now the Ramban is talking again. When you don't have a Beis Hamikdash, unfortunately, anymore, and there are no more karbanos, because of its destruction. The light is also going to be gone. So what kind of comfort is that? The karbanos, those will be gone at the destruction, but the neros, the lights, that's still going to be around. That'll be around forever. What does that mean? It won't be around. When the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, the menorah goes with it, right? Ramban says that you have to conclude. This Midrash is talking about the neros that we still light today, the candles that were lit because of the miracles involved with the Maccabees. Those are things that we do in practice even after the Galus. Also Birkas Kohanim that we mentioned, that's also something that the Kohanim always get to do. And if you notice, actually, the Birkas Kohanim actually is recorded in the Torah right before the karbanos of the Nesiim, the inauguration. So those karbanos that the Nesiim brought, those are sandwiched between two mitzvahs that we have in the discourse of the Kohanim for forever and ever. But so that's the clear Chanukah connection that the Ramban makes. He gets from the Torah, right? So first of all, how does this answer the questions, right? Let's just say it out now. Why is something? Aaron would be disheartened, right? So he says, don't worry, you're going to have the menorah. Why is that? Why is that comforting? Why is that something special that the Nesiim don't have? In light of what we mentioned earlier, you can't claim that the answer is, and that's why the Ramban doesn't take it in this direction. You can't say that we're dealing with, the Nesiim, they had a one-shot mitzvah, it's not for generations and generations, whereas Aaron and his children, they have mitzvahs forever and ever. Why can't we say that?
In the future, we're going to have that one.
Right. It's very important. That's why it's very important to view that Ramban at the end of Parshas Nasa, where he says his whole idea, where he elaborates that the Nesiim, they couldn't bring their idea of bringing karbanos and inaugurating, that got codified as a mitzvah. That is for generations and generations. That's going to apply in every binyan Beis Hamikdash. So that's not going to be the route that you can take. Instead, he has to take a different direction. He has to say that there's something very special about the menorah, because, and I think this is very much an idea within Ma'isa Avosim and Lebanon, right? That this is something that is going to be alluded to by what our forefathers do. You have Aaron, doing the mitzvah of the menorah. The psukim in the Torah are certainly referring to the mitzvah of the menorah in the Mishkan itself, right? But it's meant to hint to, it's meant to allude to the fact that in future generations, because through Aaron and his children, there's going to be another mitzvah that extends even past Korban Havayis, right? Both things are mitzvahs that are going to go on and on, but this mitzvah in particular is one that's going to be, even in situations of Galus, even in situations where we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, unfortunately. Right, so that's the comfort that Aaron gets, that there's something very special about this mitzvah. And why exactly is this a mitzvah that is given to Aaron in particular? I think this is where we can maybe, Ramban doesn't go into this, but how can we speculate? Why is this a mitzvah that Aaron is deserving of? Right? Well, why mitzvah's menorah? Any ideas? What's the message, let's say, all of about the entire menorah, all of Chanukah? There's many, but something we mentioned on Sunday was the Maharal elaborates on this in a deeper way. Essentially, the entire menorah miracle was a replay, was a recap of the battle that was won. It was a way of God kind of giving His stamp of approval and also showing His involvement in what happened in the war. The menorah is one big mashal. If you look at it, it parallels what happened in the war very clearly, very strongly. If you think about it, it's keep in mind that this time the Jewish people as a whole, you had the devout Maccabees. They were pure intent, and they were very motivated to do the right thing. But that's not the case for all the Jews. Right? Many of the Jews were Hellenized. They were people that had lost their way, that they had assimilated, that they didn't want to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. After that whole episode, after the winning of the war, that doesn't really do much for them. Right? They don't need to have the ability to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu again. They need to have the ability to want to. Right? So for them, you need something a little bit more. You need another miracle besides the war itself. So it could be that the miracle of the menorah was one that was meant to awaken them as well. And how did it do that? Besides giving God's stamp of approval on the war, it was a mashal for other things as well. Just to elaborate, we have, right? You can't find any oil anywhere in the Mikdash. They find one pach shemen, one jug of pure olive oil that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. That's a clear allusion to the fact that there's a pure small group of Jews out there, somehow linked to the tribe of the Kohanim, right? And you take that pach shemen that very easily can be parallel to the Chashmonan, to the Maccabees themselves. You're not sure how far it's going to go, that purity of intent, right? In the war, you're not sure how well they're going to do. It's like 5,000 of them going up against 90,000 Syrian Greeks, right? And nevertheless, it goes much further than you would have thought it could, right? That's the message that's being brought in the menorah, to teach you what's going on in the war. And it was also meant to be an awakening moment for Klal Yisrael as well. It was meant to teach them that when you have a certain amount of purity, of intent, of devotion to God, that's something that can provide a tremendous amount of spiritual, uplifting to the rest of Klal Yisrael at that time. That there could be, in fact, a religious revival at that period through the Chashmonan, and they did. They helped very much in bringing people back to Yiddishkeit, and there was a new chapter in Klal Yisrael's history that eventually, brings us to where we are today. That how does that occur through Aharon HaKohen specifically? If we talk about this being an allusion to it, or possibly even a cause of the fact that history unfolded the way it did, Ma'aseh Avos Siman Labanim, like the Ramban says. So that comes from a certain, I think, purity of intent that Aharon had, right? That here's a person that's so distraught that he can't bring a voluntary carbon. It's an interesting discussion as to why he couldn't. We might get into that in a few weeks. But for some reason, Aharon could not bring a voluntary carbon like the other Nesiim, like the other princes of the other tribes of Israel could, and that bothered him, that frustrated him. That ability to not do a mitzvah, in a way that he really wanted to, with such a purity of intent. So that's exactly the same emotion that the Chashmonan, that so many of the Jews were feeling at that time. And God says, don't worry, I'm going to ensure that you'll be able to do a mitzvah, and a very important one that will fuel Klal Yisrael for generations and generations to come. I think that's the Ramban's take on Chanuka, and we'll end here. All right.